The strange things that happen right before you die. What if the mind becomes clearest just as the body is shutting down? Doctors and families alike have witnessed patients who could not speak for years suddenly recall names, share memories, or deliver final words before slipping away forever. At the same time, strange bursts of brain activity, vivid visions, and a collapse of bodily boundaries have been recorded at the edge of life. Science struggles to explain these fleeting phenomena, yet their consistency across cultures and centuries suggests they are more than coincidence. Through this video, you'll be drawn into the unsettling mysteries that surround our final moments, where biology, memory, and the unknown seem to collide. The final moments of the brain. The human brain is often described as the command center of life, but what happens to it in the seconds before death is far stranger than most people realize. When the body begins to shut down, the brain does not simply fade quietly. Instead, in some cases, it seems to unleash a sudden burst of energy, as if fighting against the silence that is about to arrive. One of the earliest hints of this mystery came from studies on rats. In the early 2010s, researchers observed that just after the animals' hearts stopped, their brains produced a wave of intense electrical activity. The patterns looked surprisingly similar to those linked with consciousness. Although these studies were on animals, they opened the door to understanding what might also occur in human minds as life slips away. Later, evidence from human patients deepened the puzzle. In a 2013 study at the University of Michigan, scientists recorded brain activity in dying people who had suffered cardiac arrest. The results showed a brief but powerful increase in organized brain waves, even when the heart was no longer beating. These findings raised the possibility that experiences such as visions or sudden clarity near death may be linked to this hidden storm within the skull. The phenomenon is sometimes called a terminal surge, and it turns the normal understanding of dying upside down. Instead, the reality looks more like a final flare of lightning. The exact cause of this surge is still debated. Some believe it is a desperate attempt by nerve cells to communicate before they run out of fuel. Others think it may be the brain's way of trying to preserve consciousness for as long as possible, even when the body can no longer support it. What makes this final activity so strange is the level of organization it shows. Brainwaves are not just random sparks. They carry patterns linked to thought, memory, and awareness. When doctors saw these waves appear in dying patients, they noticed rhythms usually connected to dreaming or deep meditation. This has led to speculation that the last moments of life might not feel like fading into nothingness, but instead, like stepping into a vivid state of inner experience. Many describe seeing flashes of their life, strange lights, or even a sense of detachment from their bodies. While not every account can be explained by science, the surge of brain activity offers a possible biological basis. It suggests that the brain, even as it loses its battle with the body, may create one last canvas of intense, almost dreamlike perception. Chemical changes also play a part in this twilight storm. As oxygen levels fall, the balance of neurotransmitters in the brain shifts rapidly. Some chemicals linked with stress spike, while others associated with calm and even euphoria rise unexpectedly. This mixture could explain why some people report peace and clarity rather than panic as they approach death. Instead of chaos, the brain may deliver a final cocktail that shapes how those last seconds are experienced. The setting of death itself may influence how the brain behaves. In controlled environments like hospitals, doctors have occasionally captured the surge on monitors, but outside such places, it remains hidden. Each recorded case adds another piece to the puzzle, but the overall picture is still incomplete. Scientists continue to search for patterns that might explain whether these last bursts are universal or limited to certain conditions. Philosophers and spiritual thinkers have long wondered if the dying mind opens a doorway into another realm of awareness. While science cannot confirm such ideas, the discovery of heightened brain activity in the final moments has reignited debates about consciousness itself. Does the brain simply generate a trick of perception as it collapses? Or could it be brushing against something beyond ordinary life? The answer remains locked within those fleeting seconds, difficult to capture and harder still to interpret. For now, the terminal surge stands as one of the most unsettling riddles of biology. Why it does so remains unclear, but the phenomenon challenges the way we imagine the border between life and death. Instead of a quiet dimming, the mind may choose a final blaze, its signals racing wildly as the body lets go. Somewhere within that last electrical firestorm, between silence and awareness, lies the secret of how it feels to leave life behind, and the next chapter brings us closer to what those final visions might reveal. The life review phenomenon. Imagine standing in a place where time has lost its grip, and every memory you have ever lived rises at once. This is how many people describe the life review, a strange and vivid experience reported by those who come close to death. It is not just a single flash or image, but often an unfolding panorama, where childhood moments, forgotten details, and even long-buried emotions surge into awareness with uncanny clarity. Accounts of this phenomenon have surfaced across cultures and centuries, suggesting it is not confined to one belief system or tradition. Ancient texts from both East and West mention visions of one's past appearing at the threshold of death. What makes these descriptions compelling is how closely they resemble modern testimonies from people revived after cardiac arrest or trauma. One of the most striking aspects of these reviews is their speed. Survivors say the memories come in a torrent that feels instantaneous, yet incredibly detailed. Scientists who study consciousness have wondered whether the collapse of normal time perception near death allows the brain to process information at a pace we cannot normally imagine. In this altered state, what once took years to live can be revisited in a heartbeat. Descriptions of the life review often carry an emotional weight far deeper than ordinary recollection. People do not simply see their memories as though watching old photographs. Instead, they report feeling the emotions of those around them, as if stepping into the perspectives of others. A harsh word spoken years ago may return not just as an image of the moment, but with the sting felt by the person who heard it. The setting in which people encounter these experiences often shapes how they interpret them. Some recall the life review as a peaceful revelation, filled with forgiveness and understanding. Others find it overwhelming, confronted by regrets and choices they had tried to forget. Yet almost all who survive describe it as profoundly meaningful, as though they were being shown the essence of their existence without filters or excuses. In 1975, psychiatrist Raymond Moody published Life After Life, a book that brought widespread attention to near-death experiences, including detailed accounts of life reviews. The stories he collected from patients revealed a remarkable consistency. Visions of the past presented not in fragments, but as a complete whole. Since then, medical case reports have continued to document these testimonies, providing researchers with valuable, if elusive, material. What happens in the brain to produce such an immersive replay is still unknown. Some scientists suggest that as the brain loses oxygen, the areas tied to memory and emotion fire intensely, unlocking vast networks all at once. Others argue that the experience may be more than biology, pointing to the clarity and depth that far surpass ordinary recollection. Without direct access to the moment of death, the mystery remains unresolved, caught between neurological theory and the lived reality of those who return to tell the tale. The details of these visions have startled many who experience them. People have reported seeing the play of light on a childhood window, the smell of a parent's cooking, or the exact tone of laughter from long-lost friends. These are not vague impressions, but sharp, vibrant reconstructions that feel more real than the present. Such richness has led some to believe the brain may store every moment of life, waiting for the final hour to unlock it. Even skeptics admit that the consistency of life review accounts deserves attention. Though explanations differ, the reports themselves cannot be dismissed as random imagination. The sheer number of testimonies across cultures suggests a common process at work, whether rooted in biology, psychology, or something we do not yet understand. The life review stands out as one of the most haunting aspects of dying, because it blurs the line between memory and judgment. It is not only about what a person has done, but about how those actions rippled outward into the lives of others. To relive life in such a way is to see it whole, with all its beauty and all its weight. If the final surge of the brain hints at hidden energy, the life review reveals something even more unsettling: that the story of existence may be waiting to rise in its entirety, ready to confront us when the last barrier falls. The tunnel of light. darkness pressing in from all sides. Then suddenly a passage opens, narrow and glowing, pulling the mind toward a distant radiance. This is the image most often linked with near-death experiences, the tunnel of light. For countless people, this vision is not vague or dreamlike. It feels tangible, as if a real corridor has appeared within the depths of consciousness, guiding them away from life and towards something unknown. Accounts of the tunnel span continents and cultures, appearing in reports from hospital wards, battlefield survivors, and people who have drowned but been revived. The descriptions vary in detail, yet the central image remains: movement through a confined passage that brightens the farther it goes. The sensation is not of drifting aimlessly, but of being carried forward, drawn to a destination that seems just out of reach. Scientific attempts to explain this vision often point to how the eye and brain respond to fading oxygen. As the visual field collapses, the edges may darken while the center remains brighter, creating the illusion of a tunnel. But what puzzles researchers is how consistent the reports are, even from those who were blind from birth and could not have drawn the image from visual memory. This detail has made the tunnel of light one of the most debated aspects of dying. The tunnel does not appear alone. Many who report it also describe a sense of acceleration, as though traveling faster than they ever thought possible. Some feel weightless, detached from the body, while others speak of hearing a rushing sound like wind through a cavern. The experience seems crafted to amplify movement, carrying the individual deeper into a realm that feels far removed from the hospital bed or accident scene where their body lies. In 2010, researchers in Slovenia studied cardiac arrest patients and found that nearly 20% of those who had near-death experiences mentioned a tunnel. The consistency across testimonies gave weight to the idea that the brain under extreme stress may produce not just random hallucinations, but structured visions with recurring forms. Still, science has yet to capture the exact neural mechanism behind the tunnel, leaving space for mystery to linger. For those who live through it, the tunnel is rarely frightening. More often, survivors describe a profound calm that washes over them as they move forward. The light at the far end seems warm, not blinding, and filled with a quality that feels welcoming. Some interpret it as a passage toward another realm, while others see it as the brain's last gift, a peaceful illusion in the face of death. Stories of the tunnel sometimes include encounters that occur within it. Figures may appear along the sides, shadowed but recognizable as family or loved ones who have already died. Others speak of unfamiliar presences waiting at the far end, their forms indistinct but their presence undeniable. These details add to the sense that the tunnel is not just a visual trick, but a stage where memory, perception, and imagination converge. The tunnel has also influenced art, literature, and religion. Medieval paintings of souls ascending often show narrow beams of light leading into the heavens. Modern films and novels echo the same motif, suggesting that the image has embedded itself deeply into the human imagination. Whether shaped by culture or born from shared biology, the tunnel has become a universal symbol for crossing the boundary between life and death. Even in clinical studies, researchers acknowledge the emotional power of the vision. Survivors often return with a changed outlook, saying the tunnel left them less afraid of dying. To them, the light at the end was not an ending but an opening. The certainty of the imagery gives it weight, leaving those who hear the stories to wonder if the tunnel reveals something more than the brain's chemistry. Not all experiences of the tunnel end with reaching the light. Many describe being pulled back before arrival, often in a sudden jolt that coincides with resuscitation. The feeling of reversal is described as abrupt and sometimes painful, as though torn away from the passage. These accounts highlight the unfinished nature of the journey and suggest that the tunnel, whatever its origin, marks a threshold rather than a destination. The tunnel of light remains one of the most haunting mysteries of dying because it embodies both direction and destination. It does not simply appear, it draws, it guides, it compels movement forward. Whether a quirk of biology or a glimpse into another state of being, it represents a path few can follow to the end and return to describe. At the far edge of the tunnel's glow lies the next stage of the dying journey, one that carries the mind further from the familiar. Out-of-body experiences, a body lies still on a hospital bed, yet the person within swears they are floating above it, watching doctors rush to revive them. Such scenes are common in reports of out-of-body experiences, moments when people feel their awareness slip free from flesh and bone. What they describe is not a dreamlike haze, but a sharp, startling shift in perspective, as if the mind has escaped its anchor. These accounts often include precise details that seem impossible to know from the position of the unconscious body. Some patients recall the exact words spoken by medical staff or the arrangement of instruments in the room. Others describe watching their own chest rise and fall, or seeing their face from above as though they were a stranger looking down. The sense of separation is so strong that many insist it felt more real than ordinary waking life. One of the earliest well-documented studies of this phenomenon came from Dr. Raymond Moody in the 1970s, whose interviews with near-death survivors included vivid reports of floating awareness. Since then, hospitals in multiple countries have tried to test these claims. In one notable project launched in 2008, researchers placed hidden images on high shelves in emergency rooms, visible only from above. The goal was to see if patients describing out-of-body visions could identify them after resuscitation. The results were limited but highlighted how seriously science has begun to approach the subject. The sensation of leaving the body has been linked to unusual activity in specific brain regions. In 2002, neurologist Olaf Blanke in Geneva reported that stimulating part of the brain's temporal lobe with electrical currents produced feelings of floating outside the body. Patients undergoing treatment for epilepsy described sensations of rising above themselves or drifting near the ceiling. This discovery suggested that the boundaries of the self are fragile, and under certain conditions, the brain can fracture its sense of location. Still, brain activity alone does not fully explain the richness of the reports. People describe traveling far beyond the room where their body lies, sometimes observing distant relatives or places they later confirm. While skeptics argue that memory and imagination could create these scenes, the uncanny detail in some cases continues to provoke debate. The possibility that consciousness might not be completely tied to the brain remains an unsettling question. The cultural history of out-of-body experiences is just as deep as the modern scientific search. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of the ka, a vital essence that could leave the body during sleep or death. In Hindu traditions, subtle bodies were said to wander beyond the physical form. The parallels suggest that humans across time have tried to describe the same strange sensation of separation, even if the language and symbolism varied. For those who undergo the experience, the emotions are often more striking than the visual details. Many report a sudden freedom from pain, as if the weight of the body had fallen away. Others feel an intense calm while looking down on frantic attempts to revive them. A smaller number describe fear, unsettled by the sight of their own stillness. These feelings leave lasting impressions, shaping how survivors think about life, death, and the nature of identity. There are also reports of a strange tether, a sensation of being pulled back into the body against one's will. Survivors describe the return as abrupt, accompanied by a physical jolt or gasp for air. The transition is rarely gentle. It reinforces the idea that the experience is not simply a dream, but a sharp contrast between two states of being, one detached and hovering, the other bound to flesh once more. Researchers continue to search for the line between physiology and mystery. Some propose that a lack of oxygen, combined with stress hormones, creates vivid illusions of leaving the body. Others point to the brain's ability to construct complex spatial maps, which might misfire during trauma and give rise to the sense of floating. Yet the persistence and clarity of the accounts resist easy dismissal. Out-of-body experiences remain among the most enigmatic reports from those who brush against death. They speak of a consciousness that does not always stay fixed where the body lies, hinting at hidden capacities of the mind we still do not understand. As the journey deeper into the final frontier continues, what awaits beyond the separation of self and body may reveal even stranger thresholds, strange sensations of peace. The final moments of life often hold an unexpected twist. While many imagine death as a storm of fear and pain, countless stories describe the opposite, a calm that arrives when the body begins to fail. This sensation, often called the peace before death, is one of the strangest and most moving mysteries surrounding the end of human life. Reports from survivors of near-death experiences reveal a striking similarity. They describe an overwhelming quiet that seems to silence both the body and the mind. People who moments earlier were struggling in pain suddenly speak of a deep comfort, as though the body's alarms have been switched off. Scientists believe part of this phenomenon is tied to the body's chemistry. When death approaches, the brain may flood itself with endorphins, the natural compounds that ease pain and create a sense of well-being. These same chemicals are released during moments of extreme exertion, such as a runner's high, but near the end, they may be released in far greater quantities. The result is not only the dulling of pain, but the arrival of a calm that feels otherworldly. Yet chemistry does not explain everything. Families who have been at a bedside often notice an uncanny shift. The labored breathing that filled the room moments earlier softens. Tension fades from the face. Even when the person cannot speak, their expression suggests a sudden release from struggle, as if they are stepping into a gentler state. In some accounts, this peace is described as expanding far beyond the individual body. People who have been resuscitated after cardiac arrest speak of being wrapped in a presence that feels vast and comforting. They describe it less as a thought, and more as a sensation that fills every part of them. The feeling does not vanish instantly when they return, but lingers, altering how they view life and death. Hospice workers encounter these moments regularly. They describe patients who spent weeks in agitation suddenly becoming serene in the final hours. Some begin speaking softly as though addressing unseen companions. Others stop struggling against illness and slip into a quiet state that seems to carry them away. The brain's activity during these moments adds another layer of intrigue. Studies using electroencephalograms on people close to death have sometimes recorded bursts of organized brain waves just after the heart stops. Instead of fading into silence, the brain briefly flares with activity. Some researchers suspect this surge may contribute to the feeling of clarity or tranquility reported by survivors. If so, the peace is not simply a soft fading but a final, brilliant flash before darkness. Cultural traditions have long echoed this theme. Ancient texts describe the dying as entering a great stillness or a gentle release. While the language varies, the imagery is remarkably consistent. The passage into peace appears again and again, suggesting that human beings throughout history have noticed and tried to capture this hidden aspect of dying. Even those who fear death often report that the fear evaporates in the final stage. The dread that haunted them seems to lose its grip as the body weakens. This reversal baffles both families and physicians, but it adds to the mystery. How can the mind set aside such terror at the very threshold of its cause? There is also the question of why evolution would shape such an experience. One theory suggests it protects the body from overwhelming distress, conserving the last fragments of energy. Another possibility is that it eases the transition for both the dying and those around them, making the end less chaotic. Whatever the reason, the result is the same: a moment that defies the expectation of despair. The strange peace before death leaves behind a lasting impression. Families often say that seeing it changed how they think about mortality. Instead of remembering fear, they remember the sudden quiet that came at the end. Survivors of near-death events describe it as the most powerful part of the experience, stronger even than visions or out-of-body moments. As strange as it is, this sensation remains one of the most elusive to study. It cannot be measured like a heartbeat or a breath. It exists in testimony, in expressions, in the hush that settles over a room. Yet its consistency across so many lives and cultures makes it impossible to dismiss. What comes after that peace, however, is a mystery even deeper. And it is there that the story takes its next unsettling turn: the disruption of time perception. Before death arrives, something extraordinary can happen inside the mind. The sense of time itself begins to break apart. What once felt steady and predictable suddenly becomes warped, with seconds stretching endlessly or vanishing in an instant. Survivors of near-death experiences often describe this distortion as one of the most disorienting aspects, as though the mind has stepped outside the ordinary flow of life. One of the most common accounts is the sudden slowing of time. People describe entire lifetimes of thought compressed into the span of a few heartbeats. A drowning victim might recall every detail of their past in the seconds before losing consciousness, while someone in a car accident may report that the moment of impact felt drawn out, each fragment unfolding in sharp clarity. These experiences suggest that when the brain is under extreme stress, its perception of time can dramatically expand. Scientists have long been fascinated by this phenomenon. Research into adrenaline and stress responses shows that in life-threatening situations, the brain shifts into a heightened state of awareness. Neurons fire at faster rates, and memory formation intensifies. The result is not that events literally slow down, but that the brain collects far more information than usual, creating the illusion that time is stretching. This effect has been recorded in controlled experiments where participants are placed in free-fall simulations, confirming that under pressure, the mind bends its own clock. Yet not every report describes slowing. Some people nearing death say that time disappears altogether. They recall no sequence of events, only a single overwhelming moment in which everything seems to happen at once. This collapse of time is harder to explain, but it points to the brain's struggle as it loses its ability to maintain order. Without the usual rhythm of perception, reality itself can feel shattered. The disruption is not confined to the brain alone. Observers at the bedside often notice how the last hours of life feel stretched out, even for those still conscious. Minutes can feel like days, not because of clocks, but because of the strange weight that fills the room. Time becomes thick, as though everyone present is caught inside the same distortion. Families sometimes later describe those hours as suspended, hovering outside ordinary life. Near-death survivors frequently recall detailed life reviews that feel timeless. They describe reliving childhood, relationships, and forgotten moments, all within what would appear to be only a few seconds. Researchers have attempted to explain this by looking at bursts of brain activity just before or just after cardiac arrest. In 2013, a study in Michigan on rats showed a surge of synchronized brainwaves in the moments after the heart stopped. If similar surges occur in humans, they could provide the neurological fuel for a flood of memory and distorted time perception. Cultural traditions echo these reports. Ancient writings often mention that the dying perceive visions beyond the boundaries of ordinary time. Some texts describe it as stepping into eternity, where past, present, and future converge. While modern science may not use the same words, the resemblance is striking. The collapse or stretching of time appears to be a universal feature of the end, crossing geography and history alike. Accounts of trauma provide further insight. Soldiers in combat often describe battles in which time seemed unreal, bullets appearing to move slowly through the air. Survivors of falls, crashes, and natural disasters report the same elongation of moments. These parallels suggest that what occurs at death is not unique, but part of a larger human response to extreme danger. Death simply carries it to its final stage. The personal impact of this distortion cannot be overlooked. Many who experience it emerge changed, describing life afterward as sharper, more precious, as though their glimpse of timelessness reset their view of existence. For those who do not return, families are left with stories of how their loved ones described the strange bending of time in the final hours, often speaking with awe rather than fear. This warping of time perception remains one of the most mysterious elements of dying. It is not measurable with machines, yet its presence in testimony after testimony is undeniable. The very fabric of how we sense reality seems to unravel, leaving only fragments of memory and impossible stretches of awareness. And just beyond that distortion lies another frontier of experience, where visions and encounters wait to be revealed. Unusual sounds and voices, a low hum, a faint melody, or a whisper that seems to come from nowhere. Many people nearing death report hearing sounds that no one else can detect. These experiences are often described with vivid clarity, as though the final threshold is marked not only by visions, but also by echoes from an unseen world. The sounds can be gentle, like distant bells, or startling, like a chorus of voices calling a person's name. For those who hear them, they often carry an otherworldly weight that is hard to dismiss. Some of the most common reports involve hearing familiar voices. Patients in hospice care have described loved ones who passed away years earlier, calling to them in quiet tones. Others hear entire conversations, though no one else in the room perceives a thing. These experiences are not always frightening. In many cases, they bring comfort, as though the dying are being welcomed or guided. Families who hear their loved ones speak of these voices often remark on the calm that follows, suggesting that the perception of sound eases the fear of leaving. Not every sound is soothing. Some accounts describe rushing winds, loud bangs, or mechanical clatters that have no source. Neurologists suggest that as the brain loses oxygen, the auditory system can misfire, creating phantom sounds. Similar effects are reported by people with certain conditions like tinnitus, where the brain generates ringing or buzzing without any external trigger. When the body begins to shut down, these misfires may intensify, producing auditory illusions that feel utterly real to the dying. History contains striking descriptions of deathbed sounds. In the 19th century, physicians documented patients claiming to hear music just hours before passing away. These accounts often mention choirs or string instruments, described with such detail that it seemed impossible the sounds were imagined. Even earlier, medieval writings spoke of angels singing at the bedside, a theme that wove itself into spiritual traditions across Europe. Whether interpreted as divine or neurological, the idea of music at death has persisted across centuries. Modern studies provide a more measured lens. Researchers examining near-death experiences collected testimonies in which sounds played a central role. Some individuals recalled hearing roaring noises, similar to waterfalls, just as they lost consciousness. Others described a steady buzzing or vibration that grew louder before suddenly cutting off. These patterns appear so frequently that they suggest a recurring process in the brain's shutdown, though the exact mechanics remain uncertain. The hospital environment can also blur the line between external reality and inner perception. Machines beep, air flows through ventilators, and footsteps echo in sterile hallways. For someone drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness, these sounds can be woven into hallucinations. A rhythmic pump may transform into the beat of distant drums, while the hiss of oxygen might become the breath of unseen figures. In these fragile moments, the mind reshapes the ordinary into something extraordinary. Cultural background often colors how these sounds are understood. In some traditions, hearing voices at the time of death is seen as a sign of ancestors coming to guide the soul. In others, melodies are interpreted as the first glimpse of paradise. The meaning attached to these experiences can change dramatically depending on where the story is told. Yet the core element, the presence of sound without a source, remains constant across the globe. For families who witness it, the phenomenon can be startling. Loved ones may sit beside a patient who suddenly turns toward an empty corner, smiling at a voice only they can hear. Sometimes, the dying begin speaking in reply, carrying on a conversation that those around them cannot follow. These moments often leave a deep impression, reinforcing the mystery of what truly happens in the final hours. Science continues to search for answers. Some suggest that these auditory events are the result of the brain's temporal lobe, an area involved in processing sound and memory, firing erratically under stress. Others argue that they may be remnants of dream-like states that spill into waking reality as the boundary between sleep and consciousness dissolves. Whatever their origin, they highlight how fragile and malleable human perception becomes at the edge of death. The last thing a person hears may not always come from the world around them, but from within their own mind. A single whisper, a note of music, or a roar of unseen waves may carry them across the threshold, leaving those still living to wonder at the meaning of sounds that cannot be measured or recorded. When the echoes finally fade, what follows is a transformation deeper than sound, touching the essence of identity itself. The sensing of presences. A quiet room can suddenly feel crowded. Many people in their final days or hours describe the sense that someone else is there with them, standing close by, even when the space is empty. This awareness is not vague or uncertain. It often carries a weight, a certainty that another being is near. The air seems charged, the corners of the room seem occupied, and the dying often look toward a spot where others see nothing. Accounts from hospices and hospitals reveal how powerful these sensations can be. Patients sometimes reach out their hands as though to greet an unseen visitor. Others smile or whisper names, convinced that a loved one has entered the room. Families often notice this shift in behavior, watching their relative interact with a presence that remains invisible to everyone else. The moment is so consistent that nurses have given it a name: deathbed visitors. Scientists have long tried to understand why the mind produces these experiences. Neurologists point to the brain's parietal lobe, which helps create the sense of self and spatial awareness. When this region is disrupted, people can feel that another figure is standing nearby, even if there is none. Similar effects have been observed in laboratory settings, where electrical stimulation of the brain produced the eerie sensation of a shadowy presence just over the shoulder. Despite the scientific explanations, the phenomenon carries an emotional power that goes beyond misfiring neurons. Many patients identify these presences as people they once knew: parents, siblings, or close friends who have already died. In some reports, these figures are described with striking clarity, down to clothing, facial features, and gestures, as though memory itself has taken physical form. Some describe them as guides or guardians, radiating a sense of calm that reduces fear. These encounters often leave relatives with lasting impressions, as they witness their loved one find comfort in what appears to be a reunion. Cultural traditions add another layer of meaning. In Mexico, the Day of the Dead reflects a belief that ancestors return to visit the living. In parts of Asia, rituals encourage spirits to guide family members across the threshold between life and death. Such customs suggest that the sensing of presences is not a modern invention, but an experience deeply woven into human history, echoing across generations and belief systems. During World War I, soldiers in field hospitals often told doctors they sensed fallen comrades standing beside them in the hours before death, a pattern noted repeatedly in diaries and medical notes of the time. Not all presences are described in gentle terms. Some patients report a shadowy figure in the corner of the room that does not feel familiar or welcoming. The presence can seem watchful, silent, or heavy, and in rare cases, it stirs fear rather than peace. Researchers suggest this may be linked to delirium or hallucinations triggered by medication. Yet for the person experiencing it, the encounter feels vividly real. There are documented cases where presences seem to appear days before death. Hospice workers often note that patients begin speaking of unseen visitors well before their bodies enter the final decline. The pattern is so well recognized that caregivers sometimes view these reports as quiet signals that the end is approaching. Families are often astonished at the clarity with which their loved ones describe these presences, even when weakened or unable to hold other conversations. The mystery is heightened by the consistency across cultures and settings. Whether in a busy hospital ward, a rural home, or a quiet care facility, reports of unseen companions arise again and again. It suggests that the sensing of presence is not tied to the environment alone, but emerges from something more fundamental in the human experience of dying. For those standing at the bedside, the phenomenon can be unsettling. Loved ones may glance at empty corners or speak softly to people long gone. Yet many families take comfort in these moments, believing that the dying are not leaving alone but are accompanied on their passage. Even when framed through medical explanations, the impact remains profound, offering reassurance that the journey is shared in ways beyond our full understanding. The final hours of life reveal how fragile the line is between perception and mystery, as invisible companions seem to gather in the space between breaths. What begins as a whisper of unseen company may be only the first step toward stranger realms that lie ahead. The sudden clarity before death. The threshold of life's end is often described as strangely sharp, a time when the fog of illness, confusion, or unconsciousness seems to lift. Families sometimes watch in disbelief as someone unresponsive suddenly opens their eyes, speaks with strength, and recalls memories with vivid detail. Doctors call this phenomenon terminal lucidity, and while it has been recorded for centuries, science still struggles to explain it. It is a glimpse of brightness on the edge of darkness, brief and fleeting, yet powerful enough to leave those who witness it shaken. Accounts of sudden clarity appear across cultures and time periods. In medical writings from the 18th and 19th centuries, physicians noted how patients with dementia or severe brain disease would sometimes recover their ability to think and speak just before death. Modern studies continue to confirm these patterns, though they remain rare and unpredictable. In 2009, a study published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease documented cases in which patients with severe psychiatric and neurological disorders briefly regained coherent thought, showing that the phenomenon is not only anecdotal, but observed in clinical contexts. For loved ones, the experience is both a gift and a mystery. One final moment of recognition, often filled with words they thought would never be spoken again. The stories themselves are haunting. A grandmother who had not spoken in years suddenly calls each grandchild by name. A man lost in the grip of advanced Alzheimer's disease smiles and shares a coherent story from his childhood. A bedridden patient, unable to move for weeks, sits upright and asks for food as if nothing had happened. Hours later, sometimes even minutes, death follows. These brief episodes feel almost miraculous, but their consistency across history suggests there is more beneath the surface than chance alone. Researchers have begun to look for clues inside the brain. Some suggest that as neurons shut down, a temporary surge of activity may occur, similar to sparks flying from a dying fire. Others propose that chemical changes in the brain, triggered by lack of oxygen or shifting electrical signals, might briefly restore connections thought to be lost. None of these ideas fully explains why memories locked away for years can suddenly return in such detail. What makes terminal lucidity so fascinating is not just that it happens, but that it brings back the very essence of a person just before that essence disappears. The phenomenon is not always peaceful. In some cases, the clarity comes with urgency or agitation, as if the dying person senses something pressing that must be said. They may speak rapidly, share secrets, or seem unsettled by visions no one else can see. This blend of lucidity and intensity unsettles witnesses, making them feel they are standing at the edge of something far larger than medicine can describe. The mind appears to awaken not only to memory, but to a world unseen. Scientists tread carefully when studying such accounts. Terminal lucidity is unpredictable, which makes it nearly impossible to observe under controlled conditions. Most reports come from family members, nurses, or hospice workers written after the fact. A review in 2020 gathered over 80 such accounts from hospice staff worldwide, emphasizing how frequently professionals encounter terminal lucidity, even if they cannot predict when it will occur. Even so, the similarities across thousands of cases give the phenomenon credibility. Instead of being dismissed as a coincidence, it is increasingly viewed as a genuine part of the dying process, one that calls for deeper study and respect. The existence of sudden clarity also challenges our ideas about consciousness. If memories and awareness can return at the very end, what does that suggest about the mind's resilience? Are these flashes simply the brain's last echo, or do they point towards something more profound, a final unveiling before departure? The answers remain hidden, but the questions continue to expand the mystery of what it means to die. Some caregivers see these moments as an invitation to listen carefully. When a dying person suddenly speaks with precision, their words are often remembered as significant, even if their meaning is unclear at the time. Stories passed down within families show how these final conversations linger, shaping how death itself is understood. In this way, terminal lucidity becomes more than a medical oddity. It becomes part of the legacy of the person's life. With clarity gone, something stranger rises at the very edge of perception, poised to break through. Colors and patterns beyond vision. Long before language tried to capture them, people described strange visions that burst into view at the edges of life. These were not simple shapes or familiar colors, but swirling designs, radiant lights, and intricate forms that seemed to extend far beyond the limits of ordinary sight. Many accounts speak of colors that cannot be named, patterns that shift like living fabric, and brightness that feels both gentle and overwhelming. The imagery is so vivid that even skeptics pause, wondering what within the brain could release such extraordinary displays. Biologists have long known that the human eye only detects a narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. Bees see ultraviolet markings on flowers, mantis shrimp can detect polarized light, and some snakes sense infrared heat. Our vision is a fraction of what nature makes visible. This limitation raises a provocative question. When people at the threshold of death describe colors beyond description, could the brain be tapping into neural processes that hint at dimensions we never usually perceive? Neuroscientists studying altered states of consciousness sometimes turn to visual hallucinations for comparison. People deprived of sensory input, such as deep-sea divers or Arctic explorers, often report complex patterns, spirals, grids, or shimmering curtains forming in the mind's eye. These shapes, known as form constants, appear across cultures and conditions, suggesting they arise from the architecture of the visual cortex itself. Near the end of life, when oxygen levels shift and neural activity surges, similar cascades of imagery may unfold, giving rise to the radiant scenes so often described. Fossils reveal that vision itself has been reshaped again and again by evolution. Trilobites, armored creatures that swam hundreds of millions of years ago, possessed compound eyes made of calcite crystals, able to detect polarized light in ways we cannot. Later, fish developed more refined lenses, eventually passing on the gift of focused vision to the first creatures that crawled onto land. Every leap in visual ability changed how life engaged with the world. In this light, the unearthly visions at death may echo ancient pathways, a reminder that perception has always been more fluid and adaptable than we imagine. What makes these reports striking is their consistency. From hospitals to hospices, from rural villages to modern cities, people describe radiant colors arranged in flowing patterns, often accompanied by feelings of awe. Some liken them to stained glass alive with motion, others to woven fabrics of light, endlessly folding and unfolding. The lack of ordinary language to capture these scenes only deepens their mystery, as if the brain is sketching with a palette borrowed from somewhere else. Science tries to explain such visions through chemistry. When oxygen levels fall, cells release neurotransmitters in unusual bursts, overwhelming normal signaling and producing phosphenes, bursts of light perceived without external input. Yet this does not fully explain the structured, intricate patterns that appear, or why people so often describe them with reverence rather than confusion. The brain is not simply flashing at random. It seems to create a world with its own logic and beauty. The experience of seeing impossible colors has been studied outside the context of dying as well. In the 1980s, psychologists reported that certain visual experiments could trick the brain into perceiving hues that do not exist on the standard color wheel, called forbidden colors. Though fleeting, they suggest that the mind can combine signals in novel ways, producing sensations that fall outside everyday vision. If experiments in the lab can reveal such glimpses, it is not hard to imagine how the altered states of the dying brain might create entire landscapes of unfamiliar color. For those who witness a loved one describing such visions, the effect is unforgettable. Nurses sometimes record patients reaching upward, eyes wide, as if following shapes invisible to everyone else. Families hear their relatives describe patterns of light spreading across the ceiling or colors flooding the room. Whether these visions are internal sparks or something more, they leave behind a sense of wonder that softens the starkness of loss. The possibility remains that these visions are not only the brain's final fireworks, but also the release of perceptual potential normally hidden. Just as early creatures developed new ways of seeing when they moved from water to land, perhaps the last moments of human consciousness unlock a kind of perception that is usually kept out of reach. It is not proof of anything beyond, but it suggests that even at the very edge, the mind has ways of surprising us. It feels as if the boundary between inner thought and outer world is thinning, ready to give way to something neither one nor the other. The collapse of the body's boundaries. In the final stages of life, many describe a dissolving of the self, a strange feeling that the edges of the body no longer hold firm. The sense of skin as a barrier fades, replaced by the impression of merging with the air, the room, or even with something vast and undefined. People speak of floating into the space around them, or of becoming inseparable from their surroundings. This loss of distinction is not chaos, but an uncanny release, as if the body is loosening its grip on identity. The biology of boundaries begins with the skin. As the largest organ of the body, it acts as both protector and communicator, filled with nerves that constantly report on touch, pressure, and temperature. When these signals shift in the final hours, perception can warp. Numbness in the limbs, changes in blood flow, or altered neural firing may all contribute to the sensation that one's physical limits are melting away. Yet the way people describe it often goes beyond the clinical, carrying undertones of unity rather than decay. Accounts across cultures echo similar themes. In hospice care, patients sometimes whisper that they feel they are expanding beyond their bed, or merging with the light in the room. Mystical traditions, from India to medieval Europe, describe dissolution as part of the passage from life to death. The words differ, but the essence is alike: a fading of borders, a blurring between self and world. This universality suggests that the collapse of boundaries is not random, but woven into the fabric of dying itself. Scientific study attempts to trace these sensations back to the brain. Researchers note that when normal sensory input breaks down, the brain can lose its ability to distinguish what belongs to the self and what does not. This can trigger a phenomenon called disembodiment, where the mind no longer anchors to the physical form in the usual way. Similar states can be induced in experiments that trick the senses, such as the rubber hand illusion, where a false hand stroked in synchrony with a hidden real hand convinces the brain that the fake one belongs to the body. At the end of life, natural processes may create an even more profound unraveling. The experience is not always peaceful. Some people describe terror when they feel themselves slipping beyond control of their body. Others speak of freedom, as if long illness or pain suddenly dissolves with the vanishing edges of flesh. For families watching, it can be disorienting to hear loved ones describe themselves as larger than their bodies or no longer confined to them. These stories leave a haunting impression that dying is not only physical decline, but a reordering of perception. Evolution offers a perspective on why such experiences may arise. Early creatures in the sea did not rely on vision or hearing alone, but sensed the world through vibrations across their entire surface. Boundaries were porous, and survival depended on merging sensation with the environment. As animals developed skeletons, skin patterns, and firm outlines, the boundary of the body became sharper. In the fading moments of a human life, perhaps the collapse of those boundaries is not entirely unfamiliar. It may be the brain revisiting older modes of perception, long buried in evolutionary history. What makes this state so compelling is how it challenges our understanding of identity. We live convinced of the self as contained, protected by bone and skin. To suddenly feel limitless, even for moments, raises unsettling questions. Is the self truly confined to the body, or is that only a fragile agreement between brain and nerve? The end of life seems to peel back this agreement, revealing how thin the line between separation and unity can be. Caregivers often notice subtle changes that hint at this shift. Patients may no longer respond to touch as expected, or they may move their hands as if reaching into space that others cannot see. Nurses sometimes describe the atmosphere of a room changing when a patient begins to speak of merging or expanding. These moments suggest that the collapse of boundaries is not only an inner perception, but something that radiates outward, shaping the experience of those nearby. The stories endure because they point toward a state beyond ordinary life, one in which the body is no longer a cage, but a doorway. To lose the edges of flesh and remain aware is both unsettling and extraordinary, and it deepens the mystery of what follows when the final breath comes. Once the body's walls dissolve, what emerges is not a person, but a presence rising into an unknown vastness. Cross-cultural parallels. Across distant civilizations, stories about the final threshold often sound uncannily similar. People separated by oceans and centuries describe the same flickering visions, the same strange sensations of drifting beyond the body, the same glimpse of figures that belong to both the familiar and the unknown. These echoes are not limited to one religion or region. They appear in oral traditions, sacred texts, and the testimonies of ordinary people who survived brushes with death. Among the ancient Egyptians, funerary texts spoke of the Ba, a part of the soul that could rise from the body like a bird with a human head. This image mirrors modern accounts of out-of-body experiences where a person looks down on themselves from above. In medieval Japan, Buddhist writings recorded moments when monks described a dazzling radiance and the presence of otherworldly guides waiting to lead them. The details differ, but the structure remains. The body weakens, the boundary dissolves, and another form of perception seems to open. In the traditions of indigenous peoples across North America, elders tell of the crossing river or spirit path. These stories often describe a luminous divide that must be passed before entering the realm of ancestors. Half a world away, in parts of West Africa, griots recount tales of ancestral spirits arriving with sound drums, voices, or a rushing wind heralding the moment of passage. Despite cultural distance, both traditions describe death not as a silent vanishing, but as a shift marked by vivid sensory intensity. The Greco-Roman world left behind similar fragments. Plato's dialogue Republic tells of the soldier who fell in battle and returned to life with visions of souls choosing new destinies. The story is framed as philosophy, yet it echoes the same motifs found in modern near-death narratives: light, guides, and a journey beyond the body. Centuries later, Norse sagas spoke of a shining bridge called Bifrost, connecting the mortal realm to that of the gods. Such descriptions, though shaped by myth, reflect a consistent fascination with thresholds, light, and transformation. What makes these parallels striking is not just their survival across time, but their persistence in ordinary accounts today. In hospitals around the world, patients who nearly died describe tunnels of light, encounters with deceased relatives, and feelings of weightlessness. Scientists may explain these as effects of oxygen loss, brain chemistry, or psychological defense. Yet when the imagery aligns so closely with traditions formed long before modern medicine, the mystery deepens. How could cultures with no contact tell stories that rhyme so precisely? One possibility is that these experiences draw from the shared architecture of the human brain. Just as all people dream in images shaped by memory and imagination, the moment of dying might trigger patterns that emerge universally. Another possibility is that the cultural narratives themselves feed into the experiences. A child raised on stories of radiant guides may, when nearing death, perceive exactly that. But the debate remains unresolved because there is no way to separate biology from belief, memory from perception. Anthropologists studying these accounts often point out how the imagery reflects what mattered most to each culture. In agrarian societies, the afterlife is often a fertile field or a place of endless harvest. In seafaring cultures, the journey may involve boats, rivers, or vast oceans. Despite these differences, the sense of crossing into another realm persists. The parallel lies not in the scenery, but in the structure: a passage, a guide, and a new landscape. Modern researchers like Raymond Moody, who published Life After Life in 1975, noted that thousands of near-death testimonies share a core pattern, regardless of age, nationality, or faith. His work sparked decades of study, and while skeptics dismissed it as the result of a brain under stress, others argued it revealed something deeper about human consciousness. Even if the cause is biological, the consistency across cultures suggests an experience powerful enough to shape stories for millennia. What is left after comparing these narratives is a sense of convergence. Humanity seems to circle back to the same images when describing the last moments: light, separation from the body, reunion with ancestors, or the sound of music or rushing wind. Whether these are glimpses of another reality or creations of the dying brain remains unsettled. What cannot be denied is how enduring, persuasive, and strangely similar the stories remain. While the parallels continue to multiply, one question grows louder: are we uncovering shared brain mechanics, or touching the edge of something that lies beyond culture and biology alike? The final disconnection: there comes a moment when the body can no longer hold its rhythm. The pulse slows, the breath falters, and the connection between the living self and the physical shell begins to fray. This unraveling is not sudden but layered, like threads slipping one by one until the fabric no longer holds together. For those watching, the change is visible in shallow breaths and unfocused eyes. For the person experiencing it, the sensation is harder to describe, a boundary dissolving from the inside out. The heart often leads this decline. When circulation weakens, oxygen no longer reaches every corner of the body. Fingers and toes cool first, colors shifting from warm tones to a faint bluish gray. In medical settings, this is carefully tracked as part of the dying process. But for those close at hand, it is the first sign that the body is withdrawing from its surroundings. The periphery retreats before the center, as though life is folding inward. The brain follows on a different path. As oxygen drops, electrical activity becomes irregular. Waves that once pulsed with steady coordination now scatter, forming patterns that appear chaotic but may still give rise to fragments of perception. Some researchers, studying electroencephalograms in the final minutes of life, have found surges of activity, as if the brain releases a last storm of signals before going silent. Whether these signals fuel vivid inner experiences, or simply random bursts, remains an open question. Breathing shifts in its own rhythm, sometimes slow and shallow, sometimes marked by sudden gasps that seem to restart the chest for only a moment. This is known in medicine as agonal breathing, but the sound it creates has long unsettled those who hear it. Families describe it as a haunting echo, a reminder that the body is struggling on, even as the person has already begun to slip away. Each uneven breath is both a sign of persistence and a signal of surrender. The senses, once the body's bridges to the world, also begin to fall quiet. Sight fades into shadows, hearing narrows to tones and vibrations, and touch loses its sharpness. Yet many accounts suggest that hearing lingers longer than other senses. Loved ones whispering final words often believe they are heard, even when there is no outward sign of response. This lingering sense of sound creates a fragile link between the living and the dying, a final thread stretched thin across the silence. Hormones and chemicals are released in unfamiliar patterns as organs shut down. Endorphins and natural sedatives may flood the body, creating sensations of calm even in the midst of collapse. Some researchers argue that this helps explain why many describe the end as peaceful, despite the failing machinery of flesh and bone. The body itself, in its final act, may soften the edges of departure. What is striking is how this withdrawal does not unfold evenly. The body is not a single switch, but a network of interwoven systems. The heart, lungs, brain, and nerves each falter on their own schedule, overlapping in ways that create moments of stillness, followed by sudden flares of activity. To those who witness it, this can look like a struggle, but it is more a gradual unbinding, a separation that follows its own hidden sequence. Cultural traditions often interpret this stage as the soul preparing to leave. In Tibetan Buddhism, texts describe the body as a vessel whose elements earth, water, fire, and air dissolve in order, each tied to a physical sensation and a mental vision. Whether seen through spiritual or medical eyes, the pattern is similar, systems receding, one after another, until none remain to hold the self in place. Modern medicine can slow this process, but it cannot halt it. Machines can breathe, pump, and circulate, yet even with support, the final disconnection arrives. The body can be sustained artificially, but the subtle weaving of consciousness into that body proves far harder to preserve. At some point, the strands loosen beyond repair, and what remains is a body without its animating presence. For those who survive near this border, descriptions often focus on detachment. They speak of floating, of observing from above, of feeling no weight or pain. Scientists point to oxygen deprivation or neurotransmitter release, but the subjective experience remains powerful. This sense of slipping free is perhaps the closest glimpse of what disconnection feels like from within. As the last threads of connection loosen, the body lies still, but reports suggest perception does not always cease at once. Something may persist briefly in the space between silence and departure, an unseen flicker that escapes even the most careful measurement. The final disconnection, then, is not a sudden break but a drifting away, a gradual release into whatever waits beyond the body's reach.